You have more flexibility than you've ever had. You are saving hours on a commute. You can work in your PJs and nobody knows. And somehow, despite all of that, you feel more isolated, more disconnected, and lonelier at work than you did when you were sitting in an office surrounded by people you didn't even necessarily like. Remote work loneliness is really one of the most underreported costs of the modern way of working, and it's affecting far more people than will admit it, I think, in my experience. So today, I want to tell you what's actually driving it because it's not what most people think, and what the research says actually helps, as opposed to the advice that sounds good but doesn't seem to move the needle. So stay tuned. Well, welcome to the final episode of season 3. Wow, season 3 of the Workplace Therapy with Dr. Abby Metcalf podcast. So hopefully you're also listening to my Relationships Made Easy podcast. And yeah, we're at the end. It's amazing. So let's get to it. So why are so many remote workers lonely? Well, the obvious answer is that they're physically separated from other people, right? But that's not really the full story, because plenty of people who work in offices feel just as lonely, and plenty of remote workers feel genuinely connected. So physical proximity and belonging are related, but they're not the same thing. What drives remote work loneliness is the loss of what researchers call incidental connection. That's the unplanned, low-stakes interactions that happen when you share physical space with other humans. The hallway conversation about nothing in particular, the person who catches your eye across the meeting room when something absurd happens, right? The coffee queue, the accidental 5-minute conversation that turns into a useful collaboration, right? The commenting on the fabulous clothing like I am wearing today that your coworker is wearing. Whatever it is, these interactions feel trivial, of course, in the moment, and their absence is enormous over time. That's really what the truth of it is. They matter for 2 reasons. First, they provide sort of a continuous, low-level signal to your nervous system that you're part of a group, that you belong, that you're seen, that you're not alone. Second, they're how a significant amount of what I'm going to call informal information, informal context, culture, and relationship building actually travels in organizations. When you remove them, you don't just lose the warmth, you lose the texture of how work actually happens. And there's some great research by Julianne Holt-Lundstat at Brigham Young University, whose work on loneliness and health outcomes is, I think, among the most cited in the field. And she found that chronic loneliness has health consequences comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Yeah, that's not a soft problem. That's a physiological problem, right? It's not just a mental health problem. That's a physiological problem. Your nervous system registers social disconnection as a threat, and chronic low-level threat activation has real cumulative costs for your physical health, for your cognitive function, your emotional resilience, the list goes on. So why doesn't more video calling help? That's usually what I hear people say. Because video calls are a different kind of interaction than in-person connection, and using more of them to solve loneliness, it's like drinking a diet soda to cure a craving for something sweet. It's related, but it doesn't really address the actual need. And there's a lot of research on video communication, and it consistently shows that it's effective for task-oriented interaction, sharing information, making decisions, coordinating work, but it's significantly less effective for the kind of relational ambient connection that actually builds belonging. Video calls, believe it or not, are high-effort social events. They require you to perform attentiveness in a way that an in-person conversation really just doesn't. So the cognitive load of managing how you appear on camera, interpreting faces on a screen, navigating the micro delays in audio. It's all real. And it's why Zoom fatigue is a documented phenomenon. It's not just a complaint, it's a real thing. Incidental connection, what we call incidental connection, by contrast, I can say that by contrast, is it's a low effort, low stakes thing. That's precisely why it's so effective at building belonging over time. It doesn't ask anything of you. It just happens. And video calls can't replicate that. And scheduling more of them usually makes the fatigue worse without addressing the underlying loneliness. So that's why that doesn't work. So what does remote work loneliness actually feel like? Because I realize a lot of times I'm sort of quote unquote diagnosing people. It's not a real diagnosis, but you know what I mean. And I'll say, oh, this is that. And they say it is. It's because it doesn't always look like what people expect, which is part of why I think it goes unaddressed for so long. I see it showing up usually as like a vague flatness, not like an acute sadness. It's a sense that work feels transactional and hollow. It's a loss of motivation that doesn't seem connected to the work itself. It's difficulty feeling genuinely engaged in what you're doing. And it's an awareness that you're spending most of your working day in your own head with very little reality testing from other people. That's really what that is. And it can also show up as a kind of invisibility, the feeling that your contributions aren't being seen, that you're operating in a vacuum, that the organization is moving without you, and maybe nobody would immediately notice if you weren't there. That doesn't feel good. And this visibility problem, I'm going to call it, is real and documented in remote work research. And whenever I say the research, again, it's on the website. Go find the episode. I link to all of it or below the video if you're watching on YouTube. And the free download too. You can get all that there. So there's a lot of research on remote work, and remote employees are consistently rated lower on performance evaluation than their equally productive in-office counterparts. And they think it's largely attributed because their work is less visible to the people making those assessments. I know, it's not fair, but it's real. The loneliness and the career cost kind of compound each other. And it can show up as a distorted relationship with the work itself, right? When work is where you are all day, but it's also where you're most isolated, obviously it can become kind of simultaneously overwhelming and empty, right? Because the boundaries between working and not working really get blurred. You're technically always available, but rarely actually connected. And the whole thing starts to feel like a lot of effort for very little meaning. Okay. So let's get to what helps. So I've got 4 things that actually help. Okay. Not more video calls, not forced, what did I have a company the other day? Oh, they had a virtual happy hour. I'm not saying it's not okay, but these aren't the things. Not checking Slack more frequently. Here's what the research actually supports. You know me, that's what I'm always going to give you. Number 1 is something called intentional incidental connection. Intentional incidental connection. I have to make sure I'm saying that right. You can't create incidental connection exactly, okay? But you can create the conditions for it. And that means building in low stakes, low agenda. You got to build in these things, these low stakes, low agenda contact. Sorry, I didn't finish that sentence. With your colleagues that isn't about work. So a brief message about something you found interesting, a voice note instead of a text, showing up 5 minutes early to a video call and actually talking about something other than the agenda. These interactions have to be genuinely low stakes to work. I want to say that. The moment they feel performative or scheduled, that's why the happy hours don't really work. They lose the quality that makes incidental connection valuable. So think of it as creating the conditions for spontaneity rather than scheduling it, even though you're kind of scheduling it. I know. So in practice, it can look like messaging a colleague a link to an article you thought they'd find interesting, with nothing else attached to it. No ask, no segue into work. It could look like sending a 30-second voice note to check in on something they mentioned last week, rather than firing off a Slack message that reads like a task. It can look like getting on a call 5 minutes early and asking, how's your week's actually going, right? And meaning it. Small, real, no agenda. That's what I'm talking about. Number 2 is what I call investing small. Investing in a small number of real relationships rather than broadcasting connection broadly kind of thing. There's a lot of research on belonging and social well-being, and consistently shows that what matters for loneliness isn't the number of connections, but the quality and depth of them. Okay? So in a remote context, this means maybe identifying 1 or 2 colleagues where you make a genuine ongoing investment, not just working together, but actually knowing something about each other's lives. And this takes more effort than it sounds like, because the way the organizational kind of scaffolding works, it used to create those relationships without intention, right? So it doesn't exist in the same way anymore. You have to, again, be deliberate about it. So I would start by identifying one person at work you generally like to know better. Then schedule maybe a 30-minute call that has nothing to do with the project. Tell them you're trying to be more deliberate about connection. Be honest, and you'd love to catch up. It might feel slightly awkward for about 90 seconds, and then it won't. It won't. And over time, these are the relationships that make remote work feel less like an island. Okay. The third thing you can do is outside relationships with intention, and this is you want to maintain or build social connection outside of work with more intentionality than you'd have needed if you were in an office. Okay. That's how I want you to think about it. When your commute provided, 30 minutes of decompression, and your office provided sort of that ambient human contact, the social needs that weren't being met by work were smaller. Remote work concentrates everything: the isolation of working alone, the intensity of home life in the same space. So it means you need more deliberate investment in connections outside of work to compensate. That's what it means. So this might look like blocking time for it the same way you'd block a meeting, right? Concretely put one social commitment on your calendar this week that has nothing to do with work, and really treat it with the same non-negotiable energy you'd give a client call, a walk with a friend, a standing dinner, a class where you see the same people regularly. The specific activity really matters less than the regularity of it. Your nervous system needs to know it's going to get consistent human contact, not just like occasional bursts of it. So however you want to do that. And then my fourth tip is, address it directly. You have to address the visibility problem directly through communication rather than hoping it resolves itself, which I think is what a lot of people do. If your contributions are invisible to people who matter for your career, the loneliness has a practical dimension beyond the emotional one. So regular, brief, visible communication about what you're working on and what you're delivering. It's not self-promotion. It's the remote work equivalent of being seen in a hallway. You have to think of it that way. So it can be as simple as a weekly 3-sentence update to your manager, what you finished, what you're working on, what you might need. It can mean making a point to speak first in a meeting you'd normally stay quiet in, not to dominate, just to be heard. It can mean asking for a brief check-in with someone senior once a quarter, not to report in, but to stay on their radar as a real person doing real work. None of this is complicated, okay? It's really not. What it requires is the decision to stop waiting to be noticed and start making your presence known. That's what I want you to do. And let me say this, you are rarely going to get through an episode with me without me mentioning mindfulness. And again, I want to be specific about how it applies here. Loneliness has a cognitive component, right? The stories you tell yourself about your isolation, the threat narratives. Your nervous system generates these threat narratives about what your disconnection means. And when you have a consistent mindfulness practice, it really changes your relationship to those thoughts. It's not going to replace human connection. I'm not saying that. But it does reduce the suffering that compounds loneliness, and it builds this capacity to be present in the connections you do have, rather than half there. While you're kind of managing some distraction. So let me wrap up. Bottom line it. Remote work loneliness is real. I think it's underreported. It has a genuine cost for your health. And like I said, your cognitive function, your career visibility, your sense of meaning at work. And it's really driven primarily by that loss of incidental connection, the low stakes, what I call like ambient human contact that office environments, provide without anyone having a plan for it. And again, the 4 approaches that help are intentional incidental connection, investing deeply in a small number of real relationships, building social connection outside work with more intentionality, and really addressing the visibility problem directly, right? And each one of those addresses, what I tried to do was address a different dimension of the problem. None of them involve scheduling more video calls. Let me say that, right? But you can address the problem in different ways. So I always have a section putting today's lesson into action, and you can grab my free download, the Remote Connection Plan. It's like a 1-page guide to sort of building the kind of connection that's going to address remote work loneliness, directly. So you can get that again on my website, abbymetcalf.com. Go to this episode. There's also a full blog there for this episode, and you can look under the video if you're watching on YouTube. That's it. That's the end of season 3. I'll start season 4 in a couple weeks, and that'll finish our first year of the podcast of Workplace Therapy with Dr. Abby Metcalf. I'm so excited. Thank you for our numbers just keep going up every month as more and more people hear about us. So thank you for sharing the podcast. If there's something here that and subscribing if you can, and just watching, listening, learning. Please, you can email me at abby@abbymetcalf.com, or you can comment below the video or DM me on social media with topics you'd like to see for next season. I'm putting those together now. All right. Have an amazing week and amazing few weeks, because you won't see me for a few weeks, and we'll talk real soon.